Hi, welcome everyone to the University of Rochester's official launch of the undergraduate user experience certificate. So you found yourself at a research-focused university and you've just realized that you want to explore UX design. Why do this here? Because to be a great designer, you also need to be a great researcher. If your goal is to create a top-notch user experience, doing user research and collecting data is equally as important as designing a visual identity or designing interactions. This multidisciplinary certificate unites computer science, engineering, psychology, statistics, and art and design to focus on culturally relevant solutions to problems. So you might be wondering what you get to do if you decide to declare this certificate. So you'll have the opportunity to research how people think and act. You'll engage in the process of understanding behaviors, needs, and attitudes. You'll learn about ethics. You'll talk about bias and design. And you'll work with the Career Center to either find an internship that is a good fit for you, or you'll choose to do a capstone experience. Our hope is that the certificate exposes you to human-centered design in a structured way that creates new opportunities for undergraduate learning. So before I turn it over to the panel, I want to give a few shout outs. Thank you to the committee that worked to put this certificate together. Thank you to the alumni who are here today to talk about their careers in UX. And especially thank you to Brad Orego, who reached out to us in 2019 because he wanted to help expose students at UR to UX. Without his passion, the certificate would not have come to fruition. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Fiona. Fiona Au, she's the co-founder of the UX student group. She is a Dandy Hacks team lead. She's a CETL tutor. And in 2003, she'll be graduating with a degree in computer science, digital media studies, and with the undergraduate UX certificate. Thank you, Fiona, for moderating this discussion for us.
Thank you, Stephanie, for introducing me. So also thank you everyone for being here today. I'm a junior majoring in computer science and digital media studies. And I was first introduced to UX when I took a course at this university during my freshman year, DMS 104, Design in a Digital Age. And I liked the UX concepts that we explored so much that I ended up doing a virtual academic internship at STEMaway that summer. And I fell in love with UX even more. Around the same time, I also realized that I did not want to be a software engineer, and I didn't want a career that was too focused on coding and just doing coding every day. And so I have decided to pursue UX as a career instead. And right now I am working with a PhD student studying HCI, and her research project, although it's not about UX, it's about helping teachers teach students machine learning concepts. I'm creating a usable user interface for her, and I have been enjoying it so much. And my friend and I are actually also, like Stephanie said, going to be starting a new UX club at the school. Hopefully we'll have everything up and running this coming spring. And this club is going to allow students to come together and build their portfolios by working on semester-long projects where we go through the entire user design process. And if you're interested in that, definitely reach out to us. Now, enough of me. Let's move on to the real reason everyone is here today, the panelists. So if you wouldn't mind, please give us a brief introduction of yourself. We can start with Brad, then move on to Sam, and then Mojin.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that little intro, both Fiona and Stephanie. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brad. I was a class of 2010 computer science and psychology double major. I also minored in Spanish and dance and did a Take 5 in art and BCS. So I didn't sleep much. I was in a bunch of student groups as well. I was on the board of the CS Undergrad Council, I think 3 of my 5 years there, something like that. I'm now based in Brooklyn, New York. I lead the research team, was the sort of original member and now leading the research team at a company called Auth0. We were acquired by Okta earlier this year, which is cool and exciting. And we're creating this like identity and access management, Voltron sort of thing right now, which is pretty cool. And yeah, as Stephanie mentioned, this actually, I always give credit to Derek Swanson, who works in the advancement office. So Derek was organizing the Hagen Young Leadership Council at the time. At one point, he and I are chatting. He's like, "You've got a really cool story. How do we make more of you?" And that sort of turned into this conversation with Dean Heinzelman, and now, with everyone else involved. So I always give credit to Derek, where it's like none of this would have happened if he hadn't asked that question and we hadn't started that conversation with Wendy. So yeah, really, really stoked this thing is happening. I tell all of my peers at other companies, like, yo, if you want to hire UX students, like, look at this program. I sort of developed this myself by hand. So it's super exciting.
Cool. Sorry, I was just like waiting for a cue. Hi, my name is Som. I was a computer science major back in 2017. I also double minored in history and studio art. So kind of like Brad, I didn't sleep very much. I was also on a bunch of clubs. I was a part of BPG, which I think is now DPG. It was a dance club, all 4 years, 8 semesters. I was on keyboard, I choreographed. I did a bunch of student art shows when I was up there. And I was also the president of the Women in Computer Science Club for a year. Right now, I am a product designer for Salesforce and also a grad student at NYU. So if anyone has any questions about design grad school, I would love to answer them. Currently, I am based in the Lower East Side in Manhattan.
Hi, my name is Mojin. I'm on class of 2019. At Rochester, I double majored in psychology and digital media, and also minored in brain and cognitive science. Extracurricular, I was in Vocal Point, the all-female a cappella, the 4 years, and also was one of kind of the earliest members of a club called Rochester Design. So that was kind of a graphic or like visual design general focused club on campus. I just graduated from the master's program at University of Washington in human-centered design engineering this year, and I've been working at Microsoft as UX designer. I've been on contract at the company, and right now I'm transitioning into a full-time role. So if you have any question about like the interviewing process, like it's memory still fresh for me, so happy to answer those. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
I'm in the West Coast. Okay, sorry, I'm in the West Coast. I'm in Seattle, Washington.
You're all good. Thank you. So to get started off, I'm wondering what UX means to you and why you decided to join the UX field. And this question's for all panelists.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. I'll be brief here. This is a question that we get often, right? Oh, how'd you get into UX, right? Because everyone sort of comes from a different, everyone has a different story and comes from a different place. And for me, like, it's crazy to me now that students go into undergrad thinking I want to go into UX, because when I entered, when I was 17, 18 years old, trying to figure out where to go for college and what to study, it was 2005. Like, UX wasn't really a thing. And I wound up studying CS and psych because I wanted to make video games and understand people better. And like, that was the origin. There was no HCI program. I didn't discover HCI until Carmen Neustaedter, who was working at Kodak. He's now at, I think, Simon Fraser University. Like, he taught a 290B, he taught like a one-off course called Intro to HCI. And I was just like, what is this? Like, mind blown, right? Completely shifted my whole career. So it was like super cool for me to pick these two things, discover that there's this little niche, overlap. And that's been sort of the rest of the journey for me. And people, this follow-up question is, okay, but why do you work in UX, right? Like, how'd you get here and why do you do this? And for me, I started off doing some design work. I did a little bit of front-end engineering as well. And I've recently transitioned completely into research. And the reason for that is that, you can write some code and you can do some design work and you can do that in a vacuum, right? So you can make a bunch of guesses and sort of figure out if you're right the hard way. You can't do that with research. So there are a lot of times early in my career where someone was like, just go design the thing. And I was like, whoa, I've got a bunch of questions. Like, who are we building this for? How are they currently solving this problem? Can we test this design before we build it? And they're like, no, 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 we don't have time. Just go do it. And that gets really frustrating because often you're wrong with your first idea. So I, got frustrated with that experience and recognized the gap in the industry where it's like, there were not a lot of folks doing research. There were not a lot of researchers with a background in psychology. So I was like, oh, cool. Like, let's bring some rigor to this industry. Let's bring some rigor to this field. And what keeps me there is that I've never run a research study. I've never, had any involvement in research where I didn't learn something. Like, I think I know what will happen. I have some assumptions, and someone always says or does something and you're just like, I never would have guessed. I never would have thought of that as a possibility. So it's just like, it's constantly new, it's constantly fresh, and it's always interesting. There's always something cool going on.
Thanks. Whenever the next panel is ready, they can just jump right in.
Sure. I think it was, I had a very different journey than Brad. I actually came into the U of R as a chemical engineering major, which I dropped very fast once I found out I didn't like being in the lab. But I think that's kind of like also the crux of the journey that I've had so far, of like being really honest with yourself about what you liked and what you didn't like. And then you like never know like where it's gonna go. So like after computer science, I like tried a bunch of different classes, and then I decided to stick with computer science because there was something about it that I liked, but I couldn't really pinpoint it for a long time until I was in a bad spot and started taking, more history classes and more studio art classes. And I realized that like, it wasn't just specifically computer science that I liked, it was solving problems for humans. And that's like kind of when it all clicked for me. And then after that, like I was lucky there was a series of events that allowed me to go to Grace Hopper, which is a really good conference. If anyone's able to go, I highly recommend it. And there were a bunch of UX designers there. I specifically remember there was someone who was on our cohort. She was an older student. Her name was Turgal. She used to work at Apple. I don't know where she works anymore, but she really like introduced me to the field and like where I could go out and find out more. And it was through this sort of like self-exploration phase that I realized like, oh, like I can work in technology, which I love, but I can also not code and like solve human problems. And that's the thing that I like most about product design in the end, is that you always are solving problems, but you're solving problems for humans. And it's always so interesting to me, like all the things that they have and all the things that they face. And for me, it's just like never a boring day at work, which I feel very, very glad for.
Yeah, I agree with Brad and Sam on a lot of aspects. I think we all share this, drive to solve problems and create a better future for like the whole human race. I also applied to the university as a biology major, but I didn't take a single biology class. I just took the class I liked, took Psych 101 and DMS 101 in my first semester. And I fell in love with both of them because one thing I really love to understand humans and understand people's different perceptions and different experiences. And I was curious about all the new technologies and how they're different than the more traditional medium. So that's why I got into DMS, and like these things just combine together because I see there's so many new things, and like we need someone to look at this, examine them, and make sure that human experience are, not compromised by new technology. So that's also kind of why I wanted to do UX design.
Thank you. And before moving on to more UX related questions, first of all, a lot of people at the U of R come from a really STEM heavy background, like an engineering background, for example. So can you give a brief explanation about the overlaps and differences between front-end engineering and UX UI design?
So I've got a pretty easy way to answer this. Engineers are responsible for building the thing, right? Designers are responsible for figuring out the solution to the problem. Researchers are responsible for discovering those problems. And your like product manager, product owner is responsible for deciding which of those problems to solve. So if you're in an engineering role, like you're building the thing that your designers have done all their iterations on and said, this is the thing we think we should build based on, you know, the iterations we've been through. The designers, you know, if we're thinking about it sort of categorically, like the designers don't necessarily know what problem to solve until the researchers are like, oh, cool, we found some problems. Let's figure out how do we solve these problems? Which ones do we care enough to solve? And yeah, it's the sort of product's job to say, this is the one we want to solve because it has the most strategic value, it has the most business value, whatever it may be. We can obviously go into more detail, but it's a pretty high level explanation.
And in terms of STEM, I think people are surprised whenever they realize that I'm a computer science major. I've been called a unicorn more times than I can count, and I still like don't really understand why they think it's like such a big deal. But I think definitely knowing what people are doing is important. So like as a designer, you will always be working with different types of people, whether again, like engineers, stakeholders, subject matter experts, and being able to kind of like understand what they are thinking and like how they got to where they are is crucial in deciding on like what the next step going forward is. So like you may think that like having a STEM background is like not a good background to have for design, but I really disagree. When I feel like if the whole point of view is going to be working with a lot of different types of people, exposing yourself and like studying and working with all these types of people will only help you.
Yeah, I've taken one like web development class, but I'm not per se like an engineer. I do see kind of a very like, you know, like I know if a full stack engineer, they could possibly, you know, design a whole application and build it out themselves to have to cover the front end stuff. They can make something look really polished, but like there's some fundamental differences of how you might approach a problem from engineer perspective versus a designer. So, you know, if you can do everything, you still have to think of like, what hat am I wearing in this project and like, who am I advocating for? An engineer might try to solve problems and make things more efficient and try to find like the shortcut and, you know, create something that's like in a very short period of time. And designers will have to be there to, you know, help them to slow down and like make sure you're not making too much assumptions. And I think in a larger company, engineers, they're usually more focused on their like specific area and they're experts in the area. But designers actually have a lot more opportunity to talk to different teams, talk to the products, talk to the engineers and the researchers, and like we kind of serve as moderators. We get to see the whole picture and like what else has been going on, if there's any opportunities or any gaps. Yeah.
Thanks. I think for this next question, it's really interesting that we have this group here because two of you come from a computer science kind of background. So this question is, how did you approach UX design coming from an engineering background or a more design background, right? And in what ways do you think your background was an advantage or a disadvantage in your journey to be in the UX field? And how did you overcome those disadvantages or obstacles?
So I think there's a few things here. Saul mentioned this, and this happens at every single company, and I love when it happens. Like I'll call and like one of the engineers out on something, and they look at me like I'm crazy because they're like, "You're the research person. How do you know that? Like, how can you answer that question?" Or like that level of knowledge and that level of insight as to what are they doing and how are they doing that. I think that's super useful. If I think about, and I get this question often, I think it popped up in the Q&A already, like, oh, what CS classes are important for UX? And it's like basically none of them, right? Like I have a bachelor's of science in computer science. 2 of those courses are relevant. CS 200, which you learn how to work with other people. And I guess 3, the 2 HCI courses I took. Like everything else, all of your systems and algorithms and machine learning and all that, completely useless, right? It doesn't really serve you in a design or a research role. And when I was at the university, there was no digital media studies, like there were no design classes, right? So I very much had to learn how to do design, at least in particular, by myself on the job, trial and error, right? Like there was no schooling in that for me. The research side is completely different, right? I like have or I was in the honors program. I, worked in labs. I took research methods and all these other, psych classes. So it's like that is fundamentally different. And as I mentioned at the beginning, like having this academic rigor in the way that I approach research is fundamentally different than most researchers. So I think, in a sense, like and people have asked this, like, oh, why is Rochester the right place for this certificate? And I think it's because we do have that sort of research approach, and we do have this like level of academic rigor that if you do a boot camp, you're not going to get that. It's just completely different. So I think there's a there's something to be said about having not necessarily an engineering focus, but more the research focus being at Rochester.
Yeah, I would say that I was only able to get my first design job because I actually had classes that weren't engineering in it. So like, because I was able to do 2 minors in like history and studio art, it was like, so it just like let me have so much more freedom to do so many more things. I would say the only time comp sci has come in helpful for me was when we were debugging a front end, which happens like once and is very rare now because most engineers don't even sit in the same building as you do. With COVID and remote work, most of the engineers you will never meet in your life. In my last job, all of my engineers were in Bangalore, and so I've never met them. And so like being able to utilize those skills is not going to come in helpful as a designer. Again, I still think it's nice to know because if an engineer pushed back at me and tells me like, oh, we can't make that. And I'm like, well, if you look at this JavaScript library, you can do it. And then they'll just like look at me as if I have 2 heads. But yeah, I do think like being able to do, definitely history was the most helpful for me of all the things that I studied because you were forced to really kind of understand how people thought in a specific context during a specific time, which, for history is like fine, but like it's actually still relevant now because no one comes from the same background and no one's using it at the same time. There's all these like issues that like come into usability that really was only like given to me in this perspective wise, like because I was able to take social sciences. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a design background either. I would say I'm probably a social science person. For digital media studies, a lot of it, we did a lot of like technical, not a lot, some technical classes, but what was more interesting is like those media studies courses or like our history courses. And I think that is the strong suit for Rochester. Because if you look at RIT or like there are so many other engineering schools and where they have really strong technical skills and they have a wide like a variety of different classes just for like specific technical skills, but Rochester has those more like humanity focused, and we're not like a tech school, we're like an art and science school, and like those are kind of really helpful for you in the long run so that you can approach your problem and like and think about it in a more like well-rounded way. And if you want to get into a master's program, that's like more of the things that you actually get to learn. Yeah, so I think I would say like definitely leverage like all of the kind of the open curriculum at Rochester and take all of the classes might not seem immediately useful for you, but it just goes into, it makes you a more well-rounded person.
Thank you. So for those students who are looking to apply to UX internships, what do you think they should spend the most time preparing?
I think your portfolio. Like no job, like all the UX jobs definitely require a portfolio. And it's important that you have your portfolio like at least looking great, because the first round is there's going to be a recruiter who's not even a designer, but they're going to look at your portfolio, and if it's not pretty, or like if it just looks not professional, you won't even get through that round. And then moving on, you just have to really know your projects and, you know, be very in touch in all the decisions you made in the project so you can talk about them. Yeah, just work on the portfolio and the storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like every designer I know hates updating their portfolio. It takes forever. But I think like we can talk about this in more detail in a bit, but like whenever I was doing my portfolio, similar to what Mojin said, like the first person who sees it is your recruiter, and they spend probably 60 seconds on it before they decide if you want to move on or not. But whenever you're designing your portfolio, you also have to think about the secondary audience, which is once you pass it, it goes on to a hiring manager, which is most likely a designer or design manager who like really knows their stuff. And so like your portfolio has to cater to both of these audiences. So like when I was doing my portfolio, I approached it as if it was in itself a design project. So thinking about who are the stakeholders, what's my constraints, like how much time do I have? You know, how do I want people to approach this problem of like, what is my problem? So it helps when you approach everything in life as kind of like a design problem. You kind of just get your brain thinking in the same way that they want designers to be able to, because in the end, like, it doesn't matter what software you know, it doesn't matter what like visual skills you have. Design is all about how you think. And that's something that will never leave you.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Som and Mojin said are, yeah, I completely agree with that. A few other things I would think about. Yeah, some kind of summed it up, no pun intended, that you have 60 seconds. And if I like in the person who's been in a position of hiring for a handful of years now, like if your resume and your portfolio, if there isn't something that sets you apart, then I'm going to be like, okay, cool, whatever, next. And like, if your resume lists out your courses, I don't care, right? You're at a university, you're taking a, CS program. I can kind of guess what 95% of your coursework looks like. What's that 5% that sets you apart, right? Like, what is that thing that's going to make someone go, oh, cool, that's interesting. You minored in history, right? Like, that's not every other applicant. So what is going to set you apart? What's going to get you from the stack of 1,000 applicants to the 100 people that get a phone call, right? And then what's going to get you from that 100 people that get a phone call to like the 10 or 20 that get, the second round, right? There's always this filtering function, and you need to think about what is your unique value proposition. The other thing I will say is, like, I think Mojin mentioned this, the storytelling element, the ability to like, you need to be able to, if I'm going through a portfolio review with you, you can't just put it up there and be like, look, I did a thing, because I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask you, okay, cool. Why'd you make that decision? Why'd you go with this? Who else was involved? What did the team look like? Like constraints, as Som said, like that's what makes design. If you have infinite time and resource, like anyone can do anything, that's great. That's not reality. I often describe when I'm mentoring folks, the process of design is like you come up with the ideal state and then you back into reality. So that's what we're going to be looking for. Like the first question I ask you is going to be really, really easy. And then I'm going to start to get more, I'm going to like tighten the constraints on it to see how you think on your feet and to make sure that you thoroughly understood the process and the decisions that you made. Because at the end of the day, that's what we care about. We care about your ability to like enter into a novel situation and think through all the consequences of the different decisions and ultimately make the best one. Because that's what we do all the time. We're always in this new situation and we're like, there isn't one answer. I think that's one place where traditional way we educate people fails, is that there's one answer and your professor is looking for that answer. And that's not how reality works. Like there's never one concrete answer. There's always like, we can do this, we can do that. Here's the trade-offs. There's this other option. Like you need to be able to think through all of those things and tell me why you made the decision that you made. And that could be, we only had 2 weeks, whatever, great, be realistic, be honest. That's much more interesting than like, let me walk you through this like overly designed, portfolio. If it's too pretty, I get skeptical.
Moving on in the next part of this hiring process, right? Let's say they get an interview. What would that interview for a UX designer or UX researcher position look like? And what are the main differences from a software engineering interview?
I can go. So for I think I need to preference that like every company does it differently. There's no like one standard way. So that's just out there. So the most recent job interview I had, I talked to a recruiter, and then I talked to my hiring manager, which was about like 45 minutes, where she went over my portfolio. She asked me to talk about how I got to design. She asked me some design questions of like how I would approach a problem. Pretty standard. And then I didn't have a second round interview. I don't know, like for that specific job, there wasn't one. Usually I would expect one in which they would ask you to do a take home or some sort of design exercise where they give you a prompt and you would go about solving it. If you were doing this in person, my number one tip would to be don't start designing. Spend like if it's an hour, spend like 50 minutes asking questions and figuring out all the constraints, all of the things you need to know. And then in the last 10 minutes, like design something. That's how design is done. So just for people out there who might not know. But I didn't get to do that. And instead I went right into my last round of interviews where I had, it was presenting my case studies in a slide deck, which is again, like very storytelling heavy, because the project I was working on had like nothing to do with the position I was working on. I also had to go through like business context and like business goals, what was the launch strategy and stuff like that. So that was my personal experience. I know everyone else is different.
Yeah, I think some summed it up really well. I've done probably 4 to 5 end-to-end like recruitment processes. And some of them, most of them would take like 3 parts, like phone screen, hire manager, and then the whole loop, like they call it virtual on-site now, because you don't actually have to go into the office, but that's when you talk to everyone on the team. And there might be your hiring manager, your fellow design coworkers, or the researcher who was working with the team, or a product manager, or some like a really high level manager person that could evaluate your overall fit for the company. And depending on the company, they might have whiteboard challenge where they they give you a prompt and ask you to provide a solution within like 40 minutes. And like some said, like don't just go into design when you are tasked with that. Ask a lot of questions. And there might also be kind of an app critique. That's not that common, but I have personally not experienced that, but it might come up. Like they might ask you to pull up your favorite app on your phone and critique the design of the app and even provide some solutions. And there could also be a take-home challenge that could be presented to you in your second round, and you will have like a week to work on it, and you have to present it if you move on to the next round. Yeah, like that has been my experience. But there are also like interview loops that have none of those. Like they're just like talking and asking you behavior questions. Like I think like Amazon is really, like in particular, they're really big on behavioral questions. So you have to talk about some failures that you experienced in the past, like some conflicts you had working on projects. And it's really nice to just start keeping a list. It's almost like preparing for like a ICT essay. You have to have your own list of examples and evidence to support yourself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to briefly add, what Mojin just mentioned is really, really interesting. So we have revised. We had an intern program last summer. We have one this summer. Everyone should go apply. By the way, it's up in Handshake. We've actually changed our complete approach to hiring at the company in general, but for the internship in particular. So we used to hire interns like we used to hire full-time people, which like multiple rounds, portfolio presentation, all that. And what we're doing this year is like there's a hiring manager screen, and I think we have like one 1-hour conversation in pairs. So it's myself and our other ops person who will be the mentor, and like we just talk to folks, and I'm pretty sure that's it. So every company is going to be different. The same company may be different year over year, right? These processes constantly evolve. You kind of need to just be ready to like talk about your process, as I said earlier, to talk about some of the work that you've done. Yeah, the whole like live coding, live design, app critique thing, I think it's getting less popular because it's kind of stupid, honestly. But I have seen that as well.
Yeah, I've viewed it before as a free labor, because I've definitely had one where they just want me to update their website. So it's a little sus.
And that's something to look out for. It's not as popular for an internship, but like there are times, especially like startups, smaller companies are like, oh, like redesign our thing. If they're asking you to do anything that's even tangentially related to their industry, don't do it. Just tell them like, I'm not comfortable doing this. Can you give me some other project, some other thing? And if they say no, go find a like just, there are many more jobs, there are many more companies. Like don't do things that you're like, this doesn't feel good.
Thank you so much. So we can move on to some participant or audience questions now. One question in the chat is, hey all, thanks so much for your time today. I am looking to apply to user experience full-time positions and wonder what was helpful to you before or in preparing your applications, specifically when it came to networking.
So a few things here. One, you should always tailor your resume, your portfolio if possible, and of course your cover letter. I've been told cover letters are falling out of fashion. I don't know if that's true. Don't quote me on that, I'm old. So make sure you tailor your application, right? Like I've seen cover letters, I've seen things that like someone clearly copy and pasted and forgot to change the company name. Like that will automatically get you disqualified, right? Like design and research and all this is about attention to detail. So you should show that you've done your research about the company. If the company has a Medium, like go read some of the blog posts, go look at their, Instagram or their Twitter or their whatever presence, right? Whatever information you can get, use that as you prepare your application. The other thing I will say is like LinkedIn, go out there, see if you have any connections, see if you have any second or third degree connections, ask them for an intro to someone at the company. Don't walk into that conversation if you get that introduction like, hi, I want a job, right? Because we're instantly going to be like, all right, next, whatever. Go in honestly interested in like learning about the culture, learning about their process, learning about the company, right? I will tell anyone anything about the type of work that we do and how we do it. But if you start that, like we know you want a job. That's why you're talking to us. If you go in and you're like, hi, can you refer me? I'm going to say no, because I don't know you. And I don't care if there's a referral bonus. Like if I make a bad referral, that reflects poorly on me. So if I refer someone for a position and like immediately they're like, this person's not a good fit, why did you refer them? Like that's bad for us. And they will eventually stop trusting us. So go out there, network, get all the information you can, but don't do it because you want the job. Do it because you want to have as much information as you possibly can walking into this application process.
Yeah, actually, we also just like rejected someone because they put in the wrong name of the company we were working for in their cover letter. In terms of LinkedIn, I think my pet peeve is when people just request a connection, but like don't leave a note. I'm like, I don't know you. I don't care that we have shared connections. Like, who are you? Like, always introduce yourself. And I really like what Brad said about just like reading up on them a little bit. Most people love talking about themselves. You say like, hi, like, so like, I read your portfolio about this project. I would love to learn more. Like maybe that's your first line when your goal is to like ask about like what jobs I have. Sure, I'm like way more likely to talk to you, do that sense. What was most helpful like going into the like interviews was just like doing your research, doing more research than you think you need to do. You will always be surprised of what you find out and how you can ask them in the interviews. I have a list of maybe like 50 questions I've collected over the years that like whenever they ask, like, do you have any questions? If you say you have no questions, I will not hire you. Always ask questions, always be curious, always show that you're interested in the job. Like, don't apply for the job because you want a job. Like, apply for the job because you want to work there. And also, like, telling them why you want to work there will like make it more likely for them to hire you.
Yeah, I actually got my contract job at Microsoft through networking on LinkedIn. And it was also a Rochester alumni. He also I think he was a studio art major from Rochester. He was like class of 2018 or 17. He did take 5 in architecture. And I just like reached out to him on LinkedIn because I saw that he's like working as a UX designer now. And I asked him, you know, how did you get there? And would you mind doing like reviewing my portfolio and like giving some feedback? And he did that. And then we didn't talk for a few weeks, but then he reached back out to me and said like he actually had this opening on his team, like they're in a really time crunch and they wanted someone. And so I just like tried for it and I got the job. So yeah, it's just really, I'm really like introverted person. And also I didn't come from a culture that celebrates selling yourself to other people. So at first I was really like hesitant about this whole networking thing. But now that I see, you know, the results it brought me, I tell everyone this is important. You have to do it. You can connect to people via like asking for a portfolio review or asking about their projects, or even just like do like a informational interview or coffee chat, like if you can arrange that safely. But yeah, just get to know people and opportunities will come.
Thank you.
Just wanted to like jump one small thing in is that I also like, as like a woman and also like as someone who like also came from a culture that didn't express like really like celebrate yourself, you'll be surprised at how many people who want to help you if you just ask. Like, never assume that they're not going to reply. You know, maybe sometimes they're busy and they don't reply, then like fine, there's other people you can talk to, but always try because you never know.
Thank you so much. And I think this next one will be our last question for today. Someone in the audience asked, do you think going to UX bootcamp is worth it after graduating? And I guess also like in what situations should you go to a UX bootcamp versus going to grad school for HCI or something UX related?
It's actually, I think the second part of that question is more interesting. And I'd be curious to see from our other two who are in grad school, because like I didn't do any of that. I didn't go to boot camp. I didn't go to grad school. Generally speaking, I feel like boot camps are kind of a waste, right? Like you can get that type of experience. You can like, there's a bunch of stuff online that you can do for free. You can volunteer. You can like, there are nonprofits, there are open source projects, right? There are things I would love to have someone do this type of work on. And you can teach yourself, right? So I think these boot camps, the only thing you might get out of it is a network, but if you have a degree from a university, you kind of already have a network built in. I don't think most of these boot camps are worth it. I mean, the only exception is like if you studied, not to pick on any particular major, but if you studied, I don't know, poli-sci, and now you're like, I want to go into tech and I have zero experience, like that might be a good time to like, okay, cool, let me test this out, right? Before you try to get into a grad program and commit multiple years of your life, do this thing for a few months, see if you like it, right? Like that's maybe the only time that you'll get the basic sort of technical skills. And then from that point, you can decide, oh, cool, I want to get a job or I want to go to grad school or whatever. Graduate degrees certainly are not required for a career in tech. Honestly, I don't think undergraduate degrees are really required for a career in tech. I do think they set you apart. I think we think about things differently than someone that did a 3 or 6 month boot camp and is now a junior engineer. Like there's a fundamental difference to the way that we approach problems, but you don't need to go to a 4 or 5 year university and get a bachelor's degree to like be a, you know, a junior front-end engineer. That's just true.
I know like maybe some people like would do this differently, but I would not recommend going right into grad school unless you really, really know what you want. I worked for a few years after undergrad and then decided to go to grad school for multiple reasons. But like one of the big ones was also that after like working in the field that I really, really loved for a few years, I realized like what skills I was missing. And so like when I went to grad school, I kind of had a list of all the things I want to improve, which for me personally was research skills and like business strategy, because, you know, I was pretty good at designing and prototyping, wireframing, brainstorming, whatever. But what is the question? How do I find the question? Like, I had no idea how to do it. And so I found that to be the most helpful, just because if you're gonna like commit your time to something, you should really like have a focus of what you're doing, in my opinion. Kind of the same thing, like boot camps are like, I was never like really drawn to them. And once I read up about them, I did see the appeal. Grad schools, like you have resources, you have people who are paid to help you, you have administrators who like know so many people, you have a career center. Like, I don't know, if I had to choose between one of the two, I would choose grad school, which obviously I did because I'm in one. But yeah, it's not necessary if you can learn stuff on your own, which for some people works a lot better than going to grad school. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, I agree. I personally think everything you can learn from a bootcamp, you can probably learn yourself. Like there's so many videos online, like free programs and volunteer opportunities, because like UX is not like a widespread thing. Yeah, like there's probably a like retail company or like a NGO that needs your help to design something. I personally went to grad program because I pretty much had to. I'm an international student. I couldn't find a job right after graduating from undergrad, so I had to go to a different institution and get my student visa continued. And it was also helpful, like because I only realized I wanted to do UX in my senior year, and that was too late for an internship. So by enrolling into a grad program, I'm a student again, so I can have like, you know, another summer for internship. And so like that really helped. So my tip would be generally, if you can get an internship and if you can get a job, right, like after graduating like your undergrad, like just do that and gain a few years of experience. And like you have a better idea of what you need, and then you go to a grad program. Like that's actually like the majority of the population at my program. Like they all have like few years of experience, and they're there to either you know, because they want to get into management, or they want, you know, a better prospect for their career development, or they just simply want to learn about all the HCI theory. Yeah, so but international students grad programs are really good, and I don't think no, there wouldn't say there's any cons of learning more. Yeah.
I mean, the biggest cons is that it costs a lot. So there's that, obviously. But yeah, same. International students, it's a real problem.
Yeah,
Some programs have scholarship for grad program. Like I applied for Georgia Tech. So I also got accepted, but I didn't go. But I know that if you work as a TA, they waive your tuition. So that's a good deal.
Yeah, that's same with NYU. If anyone's interested, you basically get free healthcare if you work for the school.
Thank you so much. Brad, was there something you wanted to add to that, or?
No, I mean, the story here that someone I know that everyone doesn't is, for a brief time, I was Som's manager at 1010 Data. So we worked together, and visa renewal was coming up. Some didn't get the lottery. It's like, all right, I guess you're going to grad school. That happens sometimes. It sucks, but that's the reality of the way immigration works in the US. And it's, you know, it's something for anyone that is an international student to keep, you know, be mindful of.
And thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add? Maybe just some general tips or advice that you have for students interested in UX right before we hand things back off to Stephanie?
I think something that's important really in the tech industry in general, but in particular in this type of field, like you just have to stay curious, right? I know a lot of folks, you know, not that I'm old, but like the further along into my career I get and the older I get, some people are just like, you know what, I don't know if I can do this tech thing forever, because you have to constantly be evolving, you have to constantly be learning new things and adapting. And like, if you're walking into the beginning of your career, showing that curiosity, showing that adaptability, showing that interest in learning, like I'm much more likely to hire someone that doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience, but clearly demonstrates this ability to like, oh, like we talked about this thing, you mentioned it, and then like I did a bunch of research and I hacked around on it for a little bit. Like that's the type of person that's going to continue to grow in this field. And that's super important because these things are constantly changing. I think that's really important. I think we talked a lot about, yeah, things like soft skills, right? The ability to work with a very diverse audience, the ability to work with other people. That's super important. That's something that's really not taught, which is why like that undergraduate problem seminar CS 200, like super important, because they're like, here's a problem, here's your team, go figure it out. Like there's no organization, and you have to learn how to self-organize. You have to learn how to work with other people. I think more and more in this remote context, right? Auth0 was a remote company and we were remote before the pandemic. Knowing how to sort of self-manage, manage your own time, how to communicate, especially asynchronously, like in a remote, if you're in an office, people see, okay, cool, you're there, you're doing work. And you'll have like a weekly, check-in or whatever. And it's like, okay, cool, yeah, you're doing work. In a remote context, that doesn't happen. So you have to communicate, you have to like over communicate what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the status is, right? Like at no point should I have any questions what anyone on my team is working on. And I've run into that issue where I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you're not communicating with me enough or with the team enough. So if someone comes to ask me what you're working on and I don't know, that's a bad sign for all of us. Yeah, I think that sort of just like erring on we'll tell you if you're doing it too much. Like we will tell you like, hey, we don't really need that update. Like tone it down a little bit. Most people do not share often enough, do not share early enough. I think that's something that everyone can do more, probably myself included. There's probably more, but I'll pause for a second because I'm sure the other two have things to add.
Yeah, a small thing that jump out to me is there's also this option called UX researcher. I feel like we haven't talked about it a lot today. And if you want to be a UX researcher, like that's a role that requires definitely more research skills, more like critical thinking, problem solving, less of that visual skill. So if you feel like design or graphic design is not your thing, like, but you still want to get into UX, like UX research is actually a great option. And for that, you might probably need to go to grad school and even get a PhD if you really want to get competitive in the job market.
And the last thing, I'm going to use the word research again, but in a different context, which is to research the actual field. UX is so new and people think it's one thing when it's not. There's service design, there is information architecture, there is content designing, there is voice design now, there's AI design. Like there's so many things that are coming up constantly. And if you don't know what you want, but you know you want to do design, just research about it. Maybe you have a particular interest in robots. Like, who do you think is designing like Alexa? She's a robot. Like Roombas and things like that. So just like, take the time to really explore the field. You never know what you're gonna see. And knowing like what type of companies you want to apply to going in. Like there's a difference between B2B, which is business to business software, versus B2C, which is business to consumer. It's a huge difference, but what is it? Everyone kind of defines it differently. So you also have to like find out what that definition is for yourself, because you will be asked in an interview about what it is. So yeah, just like stay curious, explore things. Google's your best friend, even if they're kind of evil.
I think what something Sam just said is really interesting. For folks at Rochester, a lot of us double majored, right? Or had a major and minor and whatever. And the tech industry, like everyone needs tech. People are like, I'm in the tech industry. Like, no. Like tech is everywhere. You can work for any company. If you got a minor in, I don't know, environmental science, cool. Like go work in those companies, right? Like it's not just like, oh, you can only do UX in certain places. Like tech is everywhere. Everyone is a tech company. Even if you're not a tech company, I was actually super into this early in my career of like taking concepts from user experience design and applying them to the public sector, applying them to like environmental design, right? And by that, I don't mean like the environment, I mean like the room that you're in. right? Like there's a bunch of different ways you can apply these design concepts to different situations. So if you have like VR and AR is now a big thing, right? Like, cool, whatever you're interested in, there's probably a company doing something and they probably need tech people. They probably need designers and researchers. And like, there's a bunch of, specifically in the research field, there's a bunch of really, really cool research happening outside of the tech industry, right? So you can be, you know, the term UX research, I don't even call us UX researchers, I call us just researchers, honestly, at this point, because I don't want people to like pigeonhole us into like, oh, you only do tech and UX and all that. But like research happens everywhere. It's the same process. I have some really good colleagues that work for like the Australian government. So they're like researching how people go about their lives and trying to provide better services for them, right? Like it's not just a tech thing. I think it's just so cool to see where this field was 10, 12 years ago and sort of where it's heading, because we're definitely not there yet. There's tremendous growth. I mean, all the numbers are like, there's going to be a whatever X, you know, increase in the number of UX people we need. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like job security, great.
Thank you so much once again. Stephanie, I'm going to pass things back to you.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you so much for all your insights to our panelists. It was really great to hear your experiences and also your insights on the evolution of the field and what you're doing right now in the field. So I know if you're out there, you're feeling inspired and you're like, wait, this is me. I like finding culturally relevant solutions to problems. Wait, I love asking questions. I love talking to people. I love trying to understand behavior. And so you're probably wondering what the next steps are. So I will put in the chat the link to our undergraduate certificate. You might guess that we're pretty user focused. So if you reach out to me either through applying for the certificate or via email, you can find me. I'll put my email in the chat, but it's stephanie.ashenfelder@rochester.edu. You should expect a response fairly quickly, and we'll talk more about how to make the certificate work with your undergraduate education. All right, thanks to everyone for coming and have a great Friday night.